Welcome to NeuroLife Institute. One of the questions we get asked here most often is, what is functional neurology? Or as we like to refer to it, what is applied clinical neuroscience? So to explain that, first we have to bring up the term of neuroplasticity. And for those of you that aren't really sure or haven't heard that term yet, neuroplasticity is basically the science of your brain's ability to rewire itself or learn new tasks. Recently, I would say within about the last 20 years, this has finally kind of been researched and proven to show that our brain has the ability to learn new things, and not only when we're babies or in a child's brain, but also well into the 80s or 90s. You have neuroplasticity from the cradle to the grave. And we use the principles of neuroplasticity here to retrain the brain and improve function. The way I often try to explain that is these images here are a special type of MRI called diffusion tensor imaging. And what it does is it measures water, and we have water that's in fat, and you have fat that surrounds each one of your neurons or brain cells or nervous system cells. And what this is measuring is the actual connections in the brain. And if you look at this picture, in the heart. So it's kind of cool how it shows the duality of our head and our heart, kind of our intuition and then our logical brain, right, or our thinking mind. And if you were to follow each one of these lines from one end to the other, you'd actually see the connections in the brain, or how the brain actually talks to each other. And if you go to the connectomeproject.org, you can see hundreds of these scans because they're trying to map the human brain. Similar to the way that they mapped the human genome a few years ago, they're trying to map the functional connections in the human brain and in the nervous system. So by utilizing this, we can actually see how the brain talks. And utilizing the science or the philosophy of neuroplasticity is, let's say you had a dark image that showed up on this scan here. That would say that this area of the brain wasn't functioning as well or wasn't functioning anymore because it didn't have any more connections going through it. But whatever that area of the brain was responsible for functionally, we know that we could take and rewire either around that spot or sometimes even right straight through it to regain the loss of function that we had previously. And that's really what we work with here. So with applied clinical neuroscience, it's a vitalistic specialty in healthcare where we utilize different activities, different therapies to retrain the brain. And we've had really good results with this, with a wide variety of different conditions and different types of situations, because we know that every brain, even ones that haven't developed quite as well as we want to, or ones that are maybe even starting to break down, still retain that neuroplasticity. So utilizing some of these principles, utilizing some of the games and the tools that I'll show you back here, we can very closely measure the function of every level of the brain. So whether we're looking at the front part of the brain or the back part of the brain, or an area called the brainstem, which is where your spinal cord kind of plugs into your brain, we know that each one of those things has a specific job, or each network of cells has a specific job. And we've got a lot of really cool state-of-the-art tools back here to measure those levels of function. And then we've got some even cooler tools where we can play with it and actually improve and restore function in many cases. So come on with me, I'll take you on a little tour through our center here and hopefully clear up the question of what is applied clinical neuroscience or functional neurology. So when you come in, we do a really comprehensive physical exam. All total, depending on your case, we can take upwards of about 3 hours to really look very closely at the nervous system. One of the ways that we do that is with this piece of equipment here. Have you ever heard the eyes are the window to the soul? Well, they're also a direct picture at your central nervous system. And these allow us to get a really good, efficient picture of that as we go. So this is video nystagmography, or VNG, or another way we refer to it is video oculography, meaning we're going to take a video of the ocular motor system, or the way the eyes are moving. So this isn't necessarily measuring how well can you see. That's visual acuity. This is measuring how well can you see. Not just can you follow my thumb from the left to the right or up or down, but how well do you do that? Because we've found that measuring the level of function with some of those little things is really where the disease process lies, or where the difficulty lies with somebody. Take something like concussion. Concussion's been in the news a lot recently because of what's happened with a lot of the NFL players or other professional athletes. And what's really scary about concussion, or has everybody really concerned, is there's no real way to test for a concussion. It's typically considered a clinical diagnosis, meaning you go to the doctor, they said you had a trauma or you had X amount of symptoms that are associated with that trauma, therefore you have a concussion. Because when they've tried to image it with an MRI or with CT scan, nothing's typically shown up. But what we have found is that looking at function is a really good way to assess whether or not somebody's had a concussion and whether or not they have an issue going on with their brain or with their nervous system. And utilizing video oculography is one of the key ways that we do that. So I'm going to show you a video here of a patient who came in with a concussion. Now for this video, all he's doing is following a target back and forth smoothly across the screen. So let's see how well he does that with his eyes. And I'll tell you right now, that's not the video skipping as he's doing this. So again, all he's doing is following that target smoothly back and forth across the screen. But how well do you think he's doing? Probably not so hot. How well do you think this kid reads, knowing that he's 16 years old and in high school? How well do you think he sees that blindside tackler coming at him or that guy on the field coming at him? Again, probably not too well. So his risk of concussion now just went up for having a second one. But he'd been cleared to play because he passed all of the other testing that he had gone through. So it's kind of scary, and there's a gray area. There's a lot of gaps in medical care with a lot of these things because we just don't know. It's still kind of a new frontier. And by measuring some of this function, we can pick up some of the issues that these people are having. So this kid came to us not because he wanted to get cleared to get back on the field, and not because he really even thought anything was still going on from his concussion. But he was having difficulty in school. Again, his eyes aren't working, so how well do you think he's going to read? Probably not well. But he was also having what I kind of consider the hallmark of concussion, or really post-concussion syndrome. He came because he was having mood issues. Mom brought him in because her son just wasn't the same kid anymore. He was arguing with family members, not getting along with siblings, and just overall had a different demeanor about him. He wasn't getting along with friends and family the same way that he used to. And that's really what brought concussion to the forefront. It was never really about neck pain, neck pain or headaches or dizziness. It was about having emotional disturbances. It was about NFL players taking their own lives or committing suicide. It's about spousal abuse and child abuse. So I think what we're really seeing is this post-concussive personality disorder in these kids and in these adults, and we can even see it with function in a breakdown in your eyes. Another way that we measure, we look at balance very closely, and we do a lot of other complex neurological examinations to pick up the function specifically of each part of the brain. For instance, this, with a pursuit movement like that, measures more of the back part of the brain back here. If we were doing a fast eye movement, where you've got a target that disappears and reappears, and we measure how fast and how accurate you are on finding it, that measures more the front part of your brain. And when the front part of your brain gets damaged, that's really where we start to see some of those emotional things come out. Because the front part of your brain is really what makes us human, it's what makes us social, and it also kind of dampens some of our primal urges or some of our anger, our emotional outburst. So we can see a lot of that dysfunction, whether we're looking at the eyes, we'll see some of it in balance, and we see a lot of other dysfunctions or issues in other parts of our examination. And then once we take that, we put all of those pieces of your nervous system together, all of the little snapshots we get with the different examinations that we do, and we design a very specific treatment plan to go at your level of dysfunction or the level of your brain or nervous system that's not functioning properly. And this is where we kind of differ from a lot of other treatments. If you take a medicine, there's no medicine that affects just the right prefrontal cortex or just the right front part of the brain. It's going to affect the whole body, and a lot of times both frontal lobes equally, because it's affecting the biochemistry of the body. But with what we do here, we can be very specific in tailoring your treatment plan to the areas of dysfunction that you have going on, and then we can really dial in exactly how we affect you, affect your brain, and affect your nervous system. And we've measured this, we've taken our examination procedures and measured them even against QEEGs to see if we're finding the same area of dysfunction that they're picking up wave patterns in. So it's really cool to kind of see how we can assess the brain, and then actually start to mold it and change function in different ways. And the way that we mold it and change function really is designed around movement, because that's the way that you designed or grew your brain the first time. So I'll show you about one last piece of equipment here that really takes movement to a whole new level. So we talked that we were going to design a lot of our treatments, or a lot of the ways that we're going to affect the brain around movement. So depending on what people's issues are, we start real simple. It might be something like you're focusing on a dot and slowly moving your head side to side or up and down to start to reintegrate movement. It might be something like a real slow, sweeping, what we call a complex movement that we use to start to introduce more movement into the brain. Or we might get as intense as putting you in something like this. This is called the gyrostim. And this is designed to retrain your brain the same way that you essentially developed your brain or grew your brain through your life. And that's with movement. Babies are born very kind of bobble-headed, and it's not until they get up and they start to move around that they then start to talk, and that experiencing of their environment, that manipulation of that environment, that movement really starts to grow certain areas of the brain, and that's when they really start to leapfrog and shoot leaps and bounds through their development. So if we had to boil the brain down to having 3 simple jobs or 3 things that it does, and again, taking such a complex organ and trying to boil it into 3 simple things is tough, but if we did, we would say that it has to do perception, processing, and response. So in short, it has to perceive the environment around you, or take in all of the different sensory stimuli, from visual stuff, or what you see, to what you hear, to what you feel. It takes all of that information and processes it. So it takes them all, puts it together along with your past memories and things like that to determine what is going on in your world. And then it creates a motor response to that. And a motor response can be anything from a movement, from you seeing something and wanting to grab it, but also a thought or an emotion is a motor response to your environment. So that's where we really see kind of that bridging of the gap with concussion. We see a breakdown in movement, they have a problem with balance, or they have a problem with moving their eyes, and they're also having those emotional disturbances as well. And we see that kind of across the board. If somebody has difficulty with movement or difficulty with balance, they probably also have some aspect of emotional problems or issues going on also, whether it's something like anxiety or depression, or even more severe into bipolar or schizophrenia or something along those lines. So we can use this to retrain movement patterns, as well as your perception and your processing. So you might start out really slowly, side to side, and just kind of staring at a target, or maybe we'll give you a little laser that we use to shoot the different targets here that are on the gyrostim. But we can also take and we can move you really quickly. This spin here is designed more for performance enhancement. So what we noticed is, as we were putting athletes and other people through the treatments here, is that we could make their brain better or heal from an injury, and that when they were done healing from their injury, they actually came back a little bit ahead of where they were. So we started working with some athletes and designing a performance enhancement package. And that's where a spin like this comes in. So I know this looks pretty intimidating, but nobody starts out here. This is after, weeks and maybe even a month of training, you work up to doing something as fast as this. A lot of people start with just a really slow side-to-side movement. Again, shooting a laser at these targets. They might have to come up with, when they shoot a shape, coming up with the color or the shape. If they shoot a letter, we might have you come up with a word that starts with that letter, or if you hit a number, we might have you do some math. And using those different therapies along with movement, we can really use that to isolate and train very specific parts of the brain. So in utilizing all of this, we use movement, we use that perception of your environment, or seeing those targets, and then you have to process that information. And then you've got to develop a motor response to it by shooting that target with the laser. And even further, we can take and add that cognitive layer to it, where we incorporate having to come up with a word, or doing things with numbers, or manipulating the colors and the shapes that you're shooting as well. So by doing all of this, we can take and combine movement, sound. If we do, we can also put some headphones on and play music or play different sounds. We can incorporate a lot of different parts of the perception of your environment into processing that and then reacting after that. So with this, we take and we can design a very specific treatment plan utilizing this piece of equipment, or sometimes hyperbarics or other movement therapies, and develop a really tailor-made specific treatment plan, both to help heal people from some complex neurological conditions, but also take that athlete sometimes to that next level and improve things like reaction time, processing speed, and cognition, both on the field and in the boardroom. So if you have any other questions, just let us know, shoot us an email, but hopefully this answers that question of what is applied clinical neuroscience. Thank you.